Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Let's take a closer look at the Democratic Party's official policy platform, which was released earlier this week. It's a 92-page document. Now we've had a chance to take a closer look at it. And one thing that is interesting here, Kim, is it's a reminder of how quickly and how abruptly Joe Biden decided to step aside and put Kamala Harris in center stage, because the draft of this party platform was passed by the platform committee on July 16th. And that was before Joe Biden decided to step aside. So you can go through this 92-page platform, and there are all sorts of lines like, in his second term, President Biden will continue to support access to FDA-approved medication abortion, and so forth. In his second term, President Biden will do this. In his second term, President Biden will do that. And so that makes it a kind of fascinating reminder of the extraordinary moment that we are in here, with the Democratic Party preparing to nominate a presidential candidate who did not even run in these primaries except as a running mate to Joe Biden. Another thing that strikes me is the broad view that this platform suggests that whatever problems Americans are having, generally the answer is some kind of government program, some kind of government regulation, some new policy passed by people in Washington. Not at the state level. We need national policies. So here are a few lines that stuck out to me. Democrats will provide free universal preschool for 4-year-olds. They'll guarantee affordable, quality childcare to millions of working families for less than $10 a day per child. National minimum wage of $15 an hour. More funding for climate policies and public transit. Here's one. Will no longer permit companies to deduct the cost of paying executives more than $1 million a year, unquote. And Kim, I know the rap on party platforms is that they are quickly forgotten, but this one might be interesting in part because we still don't know a lot about what Kamala Harris proposes to do in the White House. She has not sat for the kind of media interviews. She did not go through the primary process where you have candidates that are trying to get the attention of their party bases by putting out platforms and policy ideas and saying, I'm going to do this. And the next candidate says, well, I'm going to do you one better than that. And so we don't know what she's going to do in office if she wins the Oval Office. But it is suggestive, I think, of where the Democratic Party base is looking at this platform. And I think she, kind of like Joe Biden, is somebody who is often apt to follow her party, not to lead her party.
I'd argue that both parties' platforms were of more interest than usual this year, in part because Donald Trump actually decided to really put his stamp on the party platform this year. He was very engaged, something that he had not done back in 2016. And then in 2020, they just recycled what they'd had in 2016. And this time around, he was very engaged. It certainly felt like he was, and a lot more of his priorities were prominent in the platform. This one is interesting for the opposite reason, which is, as you said, it was released back in July. It still was completely laced with references to Joe Biden. It's clearly very much Joe Biden's agenda. And yet Kamala Harris chose not to engage in the process. There was time to do this. It was pretty clear from the minute he stepped out that she was going to be the new nominee. Fair enough. That wasn't actually formalized until more recently, but everyone understood that this was the case. There was certainly time to change everything else that was going on in the convention, the signs, the programming, all that. She could have intervened here and tweaked it a little bit for herself, but she didn't. And that to me suggests, this is my new view, we've been waiting for weeks to see what Kamala Harris was going to do. Was she going to revert in terms of policy to her 2020 presidential run, which was very radically progressive? Was she going to pivot away from Joe Biden on key issues? And what we've discovered is no, she has come full circle, in fact, to simply double down on everything that he is already promoting. So this is Biden 2.0, and that platform really gets into that. Now, one other small thing about the platform, too, is that platform, the one that Joe Biden presented, and we're now getting here again, was very much influenced by Bernie Sanders. So a lot of the things that are in there are highlighting the degree to which this party has moved to the progressive left quite radically in just a few years. And she's signed up for that now.
A couple other thoughts here also mentioned in the party platform are tax increases, many of these in President Biden's proposals or his budget, raising the corporate tax rate, for instance, from 21% to 28%. It does not endorse Medicare for all, which has been a big question for Harris. She endorsed that idea proposed by Bernie Sanders in 2019, 2020 when she was running for president. And as far as I know, she hasn't repudiated it yet. On the other hand, the platform says healthcare should be a right in America, not a privilege. It says that Democrats will never quit fighting to expand the Affordable Care Act, which suggests to me that the Democratic base is for a policy where whatever bills that they can pass to grow the share of healthcare that is being provided through government programs, taking slow steps toward Medicare for all, they're in favor of that. And so again, as far as I know, Kamala Harris has not repudiated that idea. Last thought here is there are some lines in this platform that seem like they were written in order to insulate Joe Biden from political problems. So here's one. It says, in President Biden's second term, he will push Congress to provide the resources and authorities that we need to secure the border. And again, that's a line that seems like it was written with a specific political purpose to pledge President Biden to do something about an issue that is very important to a lot of voters, problem that voters have seen throughout his tenure in the White House. And that, again, is something where it is not clear if Kamala Harris is going to feel bound by those kinds of policy lines. And one last thought is foreign affairs. There are big chunks in here about foreign affairs, which is where President Biden and the President of the United States maybe has the most discretion to use power as he sees fit. And Kim, there, I think Kamala Harris is even more of a blank slate. It's not clear what she believes about America's role in the world. She seems like she is less supportive of Israel, more sympathetic to the anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian protesters than President Biden has been. But what does she think about China? What does she think about Russia and Ukraine? Those are huge questions that, Kim, I'm still looking for answers to.
Who knows? And you're right that this platform very much resurfaces that question. Because in my mind, Kamala Harris, that is standing out there now giving speeches, bears a very little relation to the Kamala Harris that I watched in the Senate and who ran for the presidency in 2019. And she's gotten away with this. She's gotten away with having advisors leak to the press or say to the press, usually unnamed advisors, she doesn't believe in this or that anymore. We've got this platform which still refers to Joe Biden and not her, but apparently she might be okay with that. We have her rolling out these little policy ideas, which, by the way, are mostly, as I noted, they're nothing more than a supersized version of Joe Biden's policies. It's sort of like she took all the elements of it and then she said, but I'll do it even bigger than he will. You know, one example would be he had already proposed, for instance, a $10,000 credit for first-time home buyers. She's now upped that to $25,000 for certain types of homeowners. You see a lot of that in whatever economic proposal she's put out. But the question that I think everyone should be asking, and it's a pity that the press isn't asking her, is, can you please explain what happened that made you change from 2019 till now? Because it's not a small thing. It wasn't that long ago, okay? So did she have an epiphany? Was she convinced by Joe Biden that this is a better path than the one she had before? Did somebody kidnap her and brainwash her? What exactly happened? I think she owes that explanation, because absent that explanation, and absence any more clarification on many of the issues you just mentioned, voters are completely right to wonder if they can trust that whatever she is saying now is what she would actually do if she were elected.
Hang tight. We'll be right back after one more break. Welcome back. Let's check quickly on the polling. The Real Clear Politics average that I keep an eye on now has Kamala Harris up 1.5 percentage points over Donald Trump. That's up a little bit with the addition of a recent Morning Consult poll that has Harris at 48 and Trump at 44. Kim, what is your sense? Is that Kamala Harris' slight lead nationally? Do you think that's a function of a bit of a Kamala Harris bubble coming out of this whirlwind where she was elevated to the Democratic presumptive nomination, the Democratic convention now where she's getting a lot of positive press? Interestingly, vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance on the Republican side is making this argument on Sunday. He said what you've seen in 2016 and 2020 is that the media uses fake polls to drive down Republican turnout and to create dissension and conflict with Republican voters. He said that this was a sugar high and that he thinks that the Kamala Harris campaign has leveled off and the Trump campaign is in a very good spot. Kim, is it the case that often coming out of these conventions, the candidate gets a little bit of a bump and by the time Election Day rolls around, it's a whole new world?
Oh, absolutely. Look, that griping is a bit overwrought because there has been a shift in the polls. She has had complete adoring press coverage since she was floated and essentially crowned as the new Democratic nominee. That has flowed right into this week's convention because of all these headlines she's made, going out and doing her press conferences, and then the selection of Tim Walz as a running mate has kept the focus on her. And given just how depressed Democrats were about the state of affairs with Joe Biden, what you're seeing right now, and this is being reflected in the polls, is that resurgence of Democratic enthusiasm for a candidate. But what it's resulted in, if you step back and look at these polls, is essentially a reset to just prior to Joe Biden's debate, where this race was essentially too close to call. There were polls that came out and showed Biden ahead. There were polls that came out and showed Trump ahead. That was the case both at a national level and at the battleground level. The risk for the Trump campaign and what they do have to be concerned about is that this isn't a bump, but some form of momentum that carries on the more she goes. And that really gets to some of the worries that you have heard expressed, that advisors are passing along to Donald Trump, that, sir, you really need to focus. You need to stop talking about how she looks and your complaints about the 2020 election and how big your crowd size was and all these things. And you need to have a consistent, solid message about the risk she poses to the economy, etc., were she reelected, and your contrasting vision of how you are going to govern if you are elected. We'll see if the Republicans can do that, but that is going to determine whether or not this race stays too close to call or Donald Trump even edges back up again, or whether this is the beginning of a tide that Republicans could find very difficult to reverse a month from now.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.